Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hun Club podcast, the product briefing show. So today I have Akash with us again. He's a senior product manager in Vectra. And today we are following up from our series of the Azure Security Nightmare, where we talk about different challenges that security teams might face in Azure security environment. And today we're going to dive deeper into a particular area that attackers can abuse, which is Azure governance and compliance service. So let's dive deeper into it.
Awesome.
All
Thanks,
right.
Tiff.
So first question for you, Akash, is what are these Azure policies and why are they important for security teams?
Yeah, of course. This one's interesting because whenever I talk with CISOs, often governance and compliance is not top of mind. They're like, that's a different org. It's not necessarily security. Policies in Azure are actually a very interesting service where they help enforce standards. These are essentially documents that have rules tied to them, and you're able to use these documents to enforce these standards across your environment. They can also be used to take action or remediate things that fall outside of these standards in connected environments. So policies have these broad swaths of applications, both in the cloud and on-prem, where they allow you to enforce standards and rules across your entire enterprise, which makes them quite intricately tied to the security lens, but able to really impact it if they need to.
Yeah. And who normally set up these Azure policies? And do security teams normally check these? Are they aware of these?
That's an interesting question. I think that changes from organization to organization. Like we've seen flavors of orgs where the policies that are deployed in the cloud have nothing to do with the SOC team. The implications of those policies do. The impacts
Yeah.
of those policies do affect the SOC team's daily endeavors, but the team itself doesn't go and edit the policies or assign them. On the other hand, we have seen organizations where the responsibility is shared between compliance and SOC teams, where there is
Mhm.
more of an amalgamation of the two teams coming together. But oftentimes, the team that adjudicates and runs the compliance arm is actually quite different from the team that actually has to monitor the environment for security threats.
Yeah, totally. So there could be potential blind spots if depending on the roles and responsibility of different organizations.
Very true. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It helps to talk about what exactly can Azure policies do, right? As a SOC team, why should I care? So,
Mhm.
because these policies allow you to enforce standards, governance, compliance across your org, you can use them for pretty interesting things. I can use a policy to elevate privileges of certain identities for a specific amount of time. I can ensure that only specific protocols in my environment are actually being used. I can use policies to make sure that any VM in the environment has a VM extension, which is like a mini VM application deployed on there. Now, the more sinister use cases are I can basically turn off all diagnostic logging across my Azure footprint or on specific resources using policies.
Yeah.
I can direct data in my environment using policies. I can take any control plane action in my Azure environment using Azure policies. The
Mhm.
scope of what an Azure policy can accomplish is wide and very meaningful in terms of impact.
Yeah, it does have very powerful impact in security as well if we don't know what's going on in Azure policy and worse, even worse when attacker gain a foothold of any of these. Leading to
Yeah.
my next question, yeah, then how does these attackers abuse Azure policies?
Yep, that's a good one. I think to talk about this, it helps to understand how Azure policies work. So there's three stages. There's the policy creation stage, there's the policy
Mhm.
assignment stage, and execution stage. The policy creation stage is where this document is essentially created, right? Like we say, okay, what rules have to be monitored, the conditions that have to be enforced. The policy assignment stage is where I have to assign a policy to a specific scope. Let's say a subscription, a management group, or maybe even a resource for that matter. And then there's the policy execution stage where this policy just propagates and decisions on whether resources meet the compliance criteria. If not, it remediates.
Mm.
As an attacker, at any stage across this life cycle, I have openings. So Azure does this very interesting thing where The creation of policies and the assignment, stages 1 and 2, don't require the same permissions. There's this neat distinction where assignment requires more elevated privileges.
Mm.
Across each stage, you can come in and you can abuse the requisite conditions of that stage. By that, what I mean is on the creation stage, if I only have permissions to come and create, I can come into an existing policy and create it, existing policy and edit it, or create a new policy. What's interesting about the permission gap is the assignment of a policy has nothing to do with editing it. So I can edit an already assigned policy and that way just bypass the need for elevated privileges. Let's say I do have the privileges and owner or contributor role in the environment. To assign these policies, I can not only edit them, but I can go ahead and assign these policies. And let's say as an attacker, I want to go and take action immediately. Now what I can do is I can just hit the remediate action button, and what these policies that I have now edited, which have this malicious conditions in them, can go be deployed immediately in the environment. And these changes are widespread, right? They're not going to happen to one resource. This can happen to, let's say, thousands of VMs at a time. So
Yeah.
the rollback period, the impact radius is actually very large with Azure policies.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned earlier one of the things that Azure policy can do is that it can remove the diagnostic loggings. So basically the attacker can also just remove all the logging so that it just evades any potential detections that security teams might have.
Very true. And we see that, right? We see that even if for 5 minutes I'm able to take down the logging in an environment, that five
Yeah.
minute gap is just like all the time I need to go cause havoc.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. What's very interesting is Azure policies on the threats against it is not novel. This is not something that we discovered. It's been known in the wild for some time. It actually has a special mention in the Azure Threat Research Matrix. This is this matrix that Microsoft puts out, which a lot of teams use to evaluate their Azure controls. We see Azure policy actually have an explicit call out. However, we do notice that a lot of the existing tooling out there, including native tools, actually have
Mm,
very little coverage for Azure policies. And this is an
mm,
area we see that more and more attackers are moving to as they
yeah.
become mobile, as they're moving faster through cloud environments.
So there's a clear gap in terms of defenders' detection of these attacker behaviors in the market right now that we are observing.
Absolutely.
Cool. So leading on to the next question is then how can defenders defend against these attackers' abuse on Azure policies?
Yeah, the way we've thought about doing this detection mechanism on the Vectra side is really thinking about each stage of that life cycle, like I mentioned. How does an attacker come in? What does malicious behavior against each of those stages in the life cycle, creation, assignment, and remediation, look like? And that sort of led to us coming up with three broad behavioral buckets, right?
Yeah.
Policy creation and modification, the assignment of a policy to a specific scope in the environment, and then the
Mm,
fact that remediation actions are taking place, what those remediation actions are. So
mm,
across this life cycle, looking for behavioral patterns that fall outside of the ordinary, are coming from the sources that are not previously known, actions being taken in subscriptions not previously touched, making sure we're able to surface that behavior with high fidelity. A very important call out is that you are able to assign a non-human identity to an Azure policy to take actions. We've spoken about human and non-human identities in a previous podcast. I would recommend listeners
yeah.
go check it out. But when you assign a non-human system assigned managed identity as the means to take an action, even if you were to see this action in the logs, it would not be tied back to an actionable identity. Who do you go talk to if all I see in the logs is a non-human identity that has no reference to a human? So
Mm,
one of the big things that we've been doing here is tying it all back to someone that's actionable so that when a SOC team sees an alert that's associated with policy remediation, they know
mm,
immediately who to go talk to, right? And
yeah.
what that does is it saves hours of investigation time when it comes to investigating threats against Azure policies.
Yeah. Yeah. And it all comes down to what we believe in signal clarity. It's how we correlate, we don't only give you the detections, but we also correlate it and we stitch it back to the original compromised account. Either it's a human identities or non-human identity, so that as Akash used that, we help the security teams to minimize the time that they need to do investigation. You don't need to pivot into different tools and do manual stitching of 65 character object ID to find out who it is. So it's, yeah,
Yep.
really important here.
We're very strong believers in the coverage being only part of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
Like the even more arguably important parts are actionability. So bringing clarity to that signal, which is like Tiff, what you mentioned, right? Tying it back to something that's actionable that folks can go address immediately rather than pivoting between 5 different screens trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And making typo when you're doing it.
And
Yeah.
this time, yes.
Awesome. So I guess we're wrapping up this episode. And from what we discussed, I have 3 takeaways. So I think the first one is really that security teams do need to care about Azure policies, given how powerful they are, as we just talked about, how many things that they can do affecting the Azure control plane. And the second takeaway for me is that attackers do abuse these government and compliance service Azure policies. They can assign, they can execute different Azure policies as well, which can cause a lot of damage and in the organization. And the third takeaway for me is that native tools doesn't necessarily detect these behaviors by default. And so it's defenders do need to leverage AI, especially to figure out which one is suspicious activities, which one is the normal admin behaviors, and also correlate it so that they can speed up their investigation and really find these suspicious behaviors and stop them before damage can be done.
Yep, I'd agree. Could not have put it better.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Akash, for joining me for another conversation about Azure threats. And thank you for tuning in to our conversation as well. As again, this is one part of our broader Azure security series. So if you haven't checked out the other ways that attackers can abuse your Azure environment, do check them out and let us know what you think in the comment and subscribe to our channel if you think these content are helping you. So thank you so much again for joining us, and we hope to see you in the next episode.